My name is Scott Dill, and I'm on the business development team here at the Real Story Group. We certainly appreciate you taking the time to join us for today's presentation. We're very excited to have our company founder and senior web content management analyst, Tony Byrne, leading today's webinar about measuring the effectiveness of your web content management technology. A couple of quick housekeeping items of note before we get started. First, all attendees will be receiving the slides from today's presentation. And for our subscribers on the line, you'll also be able to access a recording of the webinar. If you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to enter those into the questions window. With that, I'd like to turn things over to Tony.
Great, thanks, Scott. Really exciting to be here today. I was thinking, it was 20 years ago this summer that I first used the first web CMS, and it was something of a frustrating experience. And over the years, I've seen a lot of developers and designers and content strategists and marketers do really wonderful things with this technology. I think we've also seen a lot of frustration over the years as well, and at some level, Real Story Group has kind of channeled some of those frustrations. But I'm really excited to kind of open a new chapter in this, which is around, okay, we may be struggling a little bit with this technology, but how can we become more effective? And the first thing about managing more effectively is, of course, measuring more effectively. And so we're going to be talking about over the next half hour is how do you measure the effectiveness of your web CMS platform. Now, on average, about half of you on the call have never seen Real Story Group before. We're an analyst firm. You might compare us to like a Gartner and a Forrester, but we're really quite different. First of all, we work only for buyers and never for vendors, and so that allows us to analyze the weaknesses and strengths of the tools and vendors in a much more hard-hitting sort of way. We're the folks who are going to tell you the real story about not just what's good, but also what's bad about the different tools and vendors. And if you subscribe to our research, we can advise and mentor you in successful strategies and technology selections. The other service that we provide to our subscribers is being able to benchmark your digital effectiveness, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. The different technologies we cover, of course, digital workplace and marketing technologies are, again, a buyer's advocate covering a number of different technologies you can see here on our subway line. And the one we're going to be focusing on today is web content and experience management, although some of the tools you'll see and methodologies could apply across all of these different technologies. So we'll start with RSG's, what we call the gap model. And here we're looking at, how can you go from low to high on a technology capability spectrum? So part of the problem is here on the right, which is the hyperbole gap, which is the difference between what vendors say that their technology can do and then what the vendor software really can do. And of course, traditionally, Real Story Group, we work to try to close this gap on your behalf by telling you the real story about what the tools do and don't want to do. But there's another gap here, which we call a capacity gap, and that's what the technology can do, but then versus what do you actually have the capacity to do. And this is just as significant a gap between getting you from a low capability environment to a high capability environment. So the hyperbole gap leads to a variety of problems you see here in the red, but today I'm going to focus more on the brown side of this here in terms of missed opportunities, that definitely project and budget overruns, confusion and misalignment, and worst of all, I think not leveraging what is some cases a significant investment that you've made in your existing WCM tool. So how can you not just pick the right technology, which helps close the hyperbole gap, but how can you make best use of the technology you already have to really close that capacity gap? And the capacity gap is pretty significant. This is some research we did with WCM leaders around the world late last year, and it shows a variety of different challenges that they're facing. And the stuff here in red and orange, that's bad, right? It's a prohibitive or difficult problem or a moderately challenging problem. So the fact that you see all these warm colors here shows that there's some significant issues out there. And I won't go into a great deal about this today, but you can see some patterns here: insufficient staffing, insufficient development resources, insufficient funding, but then also lacking a strategy and governance limits on some of your flexibility, limits on multi-channel delivery, so on and so forth. So these are some significant challenges that you all are facing out there. And so we really need to have an open conversation about how do we address some of these challenges. And just to riff a little bit on governance, it's really interesting, all the different sort of models here around governance and where does the WCM team even report to. And there's, of course, a variety of different models here. I'm not going to belabor which one is better than the other, but just to suggest that there's governance is clearly an area where there's a lot of confusion and a lot of desire to become more effective. So what we've been putting together over the last couple of years and have rolled out earlier this year is an effectiveness model. Now, anyone can access this effectiveness model. Subscribers get a sort of an enhanced view and tools out of it, but the effectiveness model is basically a structured framework for building a roadmap in the context of an overall strategy, first by measuring where you are against the community at large and against other people, other organizations within your particular industry. And you can try it at any time at realstorygroup.com /realscore, and I'll show you a demo here in a second, but I want to just sort of just describe a little bit about what this is supposed to do. And I'll do this by way of an example. Let's take two customers, both WCM customers. They're both in the same industry. Let's say that they're technology companies, Enterprise A and Enterprise B. Now, they go through this survey, and they both score 28, which is a 43% score out of 65. So what's interesting about that is this puts them probably in the sweet spot of companies overall, but they're actually in the bottom quartile of the technology industry. In other words, they're kind of behind their peers. So here's these two companies, and they really, okay, they see they're behind. Should they have the same transformation roadmap? Would you say yes or no? It turns out that actually they're going to need very different types of transformation roadmaps. So let's look at their scores against some of these categories that we measure: organizational capacity, digital capabilities, and systems maturity. So Enterprise A has really invested quite a bit in systems maturity, but hasn't rolled out the different digital capabilities, whereas Enterprise B, pretty similar score as far as organizational capacity, has really focused on features and functionality, but at the expense of some of the systems underpinnings that they're going to need at an architectural level to really be successful. So they're both running certain risks here. They both have certain opportunities, but their WCM transformation roadmaps are likely to be fairly different, even though they have the same score. So what you really want to do here is drill down into some of the details. So let's look at Enterprise B. Here's all of the different organizational dimensions that might make up your overall organizational score: business team capacity, technical team capacity, governance again, and program management, and analytics and optimization. And you can see that their score here is not just below the technology benchmark, but also the cross-industry average. Likewise, you can cover a range of different digital services in WCM, from content curation, content lifecycle, multi-channel engagement, multinational engagement, segmentation, personalization, campaign management. And here, of course, they're doing a little bit better. Obviously, some areas, particularly around segmentation and personalization, where they need to improve. Then on the system side, this is obviously where they have definitely underinvested, and this will clearly come back to bite them in the long run. And so they're misaligned here, and they need to be focusing more on improving their capabilities here. So this is an example of where two different organizations have the same score, but when you get into the details in terms of their assessment, where they are leading and lagging can be quite different, and that's going to provide different markers about where they need to be going next. All right, so that's just setting it up. Now let's get into the fun part, which is a live demo here. So let's just go right into the tool, and I'll remind you that if you have any questions or comments, or you disagree with anything, feel free to use the questions tab on your GoToMeeting control panel, and we'll have a little Q&A at the end. All right, so here's the effectiveness model we saw, and I'm going to go through web content and experience management here. And it's going to start asking me some questions, and I won't belabor these in detail because you can go through this for free on your own, but let's say, business team capacity. Where are we? We have 5 different levels here. Technical team capacity, governance and program management, and then, of course, analytics and optimization. So I'm going to just take a kind of a basic sort of, that we're kind of entry level there. But on content, maybe we focused a lot on controlled vocabulary, so that's good. Content lifecycle, we've got some automation where necessary, some localization. We have responsive templates, and we've got hooks into translation management. You can see this is one of the longer ones because obviously the digital capabilities are really important. Segmentation, personalization, campaign management, and so now we're going to move on to systems maturity. Where are we at? Performance and reliability, and let's say with some customization, some integration with identity management, but not really the speed there. So now we get the results. Okay, I'm going to continue here as a guest. And what I'm going to do here actually is, sorry about that, I'm going to log in real quickly here. And so here's my scores. I got a 40. So if I hadn't logged in there, I would have still seen some of my scores and some of my charts, but not all of them, and I wouldn't have been able to export here to PowerPoint. But you get some basic charts here that show your raw score, and then the estimated benchmark against, in this case, I self-identified as a technology company. So my score is a little bit low here. But more importantly, it's going to show me where I'm doing relative to, again, the RSG technology benchmark and then the cross-industry average. Right now, we've set some of these benchmarks ourselves. As more and more people participate, the benchmarks are going to be set by you and your peers. There's certain areas, I think in nonprofits, government, some other areas where we've got a statistically significant number where the benchmarks are actually set by the actual data that's input. So the important thing is I have all of these great scores here, but even more importantly, I can go back and modify my answers, view results for a different industry. I can get access to very specific sorts of advisory papers to address some of the shortcomings that I have that have been customized to my particular deficiencies, and then also it can save this file here to my desktop and open up a PowerPoint version of this, which is really important because we have found that in many cases, people need to socialize these results and share them with their peers. So we give you a kind of a custom PowerPoint to be able to do that. Okay, so that was a live demo. Again, I encourage you to try this yourself. Let's see here, just go back to the deck. All right. And a little bit, there we go. Let's just go back here to the live demo. Didn't like it when I had 2 PowerPoint files open. All right. So what's interesting is we're starting to get this data in, as I mentioned, and we're noticing that some of the different industry verticals show substantially different levels of effectiveness in terms of self-reporting. Media publishing, as you'd expect, fairly high. Financial services, definitely we saw technology fairly high. Not-for-profit and higher education rolling in a little lower. And this isn't a value judgment about that. It just means that within some segments, people are struggling a little bit more, or maybe have not invested as effectively in their WCM systems. And I think for those of us who care about the efficacy of these technologies, this is going to be really important for us to understand, to see how can we help organizations move the needle based on the particular challenges that they face in their particular industry or vertical. So what would you use this for? Well, it's really interesting. In a couple of cases, we've had organizations use this for stakeholder alignment, and there's a couple different ways we've done this. The first was a hotel chain where the marketing and the IT departments each conducted their effectiveness assessment separately. Then they came back together and they identified some differences in their perception of the current effectiveness of the teams, and they were able to use this as a discussion point to kind of understand where the other was coming from and to focus their future investments to make sure everyone was on the same page. Manufacturing company, kind of the same goal, but what they did was they did the effectiveness assessment together as a group, so they came up with a group sort of assignments and a group score, and they were able to get a lot of alignment on their current state and also alignment on sort of near-term and medium-term changes they were going to make to become more effective. So a couple different ways of using this to gain alignment. There's some other examples of just things that people have done with this to improve their systems. So one was a major insurance company just did a significant upgrade and consolidation, selecting a new WCM platform, and they're using it as a baseline to then track their improvement going forward. So every quarter they're going to come back and say, okay, how are we doing here? Where have we improved? Maybe where have we fallen behind? Media company did this, was very interesting. They thought that they were doing very poorly, thought that they were very much behind. We weren't so sure about that. Took them through this exercise, and they realized actually they were comparing well, not just with all WCM customers as a whole, but with their media industry peers. A consumer packaged goods company used this when they brought their digital team together for an off-site meeting. They used it as a way of both prepping and then having a conversation about goals going forward. And then multiple global consulting firm systems and integrators have been using this to assess their client state. So they use it in connection with helping their clients become more effective. So there's a lot of different uses for this, and once again, this is a kind of a freemium model, so you can go through it and go through the free version as well and get a score and some initial deliverables. So just to kind of summarize here, there's a couple of gaps that we have in terms of WCM effectiveness, and one is the Hyperbole Gap. Certainly an area that has always been the case in software and technology more generally, and obviously RSG has a lot of research about this to help you find out how the tools really work. And then also there's the capacity gap, and if you are going to manage digital transformation more effectively, first you have to measure in a fairly fine-grained way where you're at, and then come up with specific recommendations for where you want to go going forward. And so that's what the Real Score effectiveness model is all about. And so hopefully this gives you a sense for how you can take this tool and use it to become more effective yourself. So we've gotten a few questions, and once again I'll remind you that you can ask any questions or make any comments or just share any of your own experiences through the questions tab in GoToMeeting. And while I sort through these and get them sorted out, Scott, I don't know if you want to jump in with any sort of contact information.
I do. Thanks, Tony. And as Tony mentioned during the presentation, Real Story Group provides tools that enable organizations to benchmark the effectiveness of their incumbent technology, like he just walked through, but also create a short list of the right technology fits based on their own unique criteria. So whether it's assisting on a plan to become more effective with your current technology, validating a short list for your internal stakeholders, or providing deep dive analysis on a particular vendor, we exist as an organization to help companies like yours navigate through their digital journey and also assist them with making smart digital workplace and digital marketing technology choices. To learn more about getting access to our research and leveraging advisory services from Tony and the rest of our analyst team, you can reach out to us at info@realstorygroup.com. You can call 617-340-6464, or you can also visit the chat feature that's on our website. We'd be happy to walk you through the Real Story Group subscriber experience and discuss the subscription options that are available. Tony, it looks like some questions have come into the queue if you want to address those.
Definitely. Yeah. So first, just Jeff is asking, will the deck be available for download afterwards? And yes, Jeff, you'll definitely get a link to the deck. Let's see, Bill is asking, how often should my organization do this assessment? You know, with our subscribers, we typically tell them quarterly, and part of what you get with the subscription is a quarterly check-in with the analyst. So we check in with you, review your score with you, and help you figure out where you need to go. So I think quarterly is definitely a good idea. Alexander's asking, I'd like to know how, if this works to measure the effectiveness of WCM if the majority is on organizational points. Well, I would say it's actually a minority that's on organizational points. About a third or a little bit less than a third of the questions had to do with organizational issues. Now, organizational issues can be decisive in your success. So I could argue that, in fact, maybe we should even put more emphasis on them. But, you know, you saw in the surveys that people were really confronting a lot of challenges that were organizational related, either in terms of capacity or in terms of governance and those sorts of things. So, so organizational makes up about a third of the weighting. The other roughly about 20 to 25% is around systems maturity and architecture, obviously very critical to your success, particularly your long-term success and the resilience of your systems. And then the last 40 to 45% is related to the actual digital capabilities. In other words, what can you do in your WCM system? So that's how we balanced it out. I'd certainly be open over time about whether there are ways that we should change the weightings. So hi, Leona, you've got a great question. Would this tool help my organization identify skills and skills gaps as we, align and reunify our institutional websites? And I think so in a couple different ways. First, we ask straight out. We ask you to identify in a very specific, fine-grained way about what capacities and capabilities you have, both on the business side and on the technical side. But then I think that there's definitely some skill consequences that come out of some of the other questions around capability and maturity. And some of those then will trigger in the system some recommendations to some checklists that we have around education and skill building in terms of specific curricula or capacity that you may want to be building. So the short answer, Leona, is yes. How have you seen other organizations getting their team to do this assessment? Well, there's a couple different ways to do this. I mean, we've done this literally with like pencil and paper. That's obviously not ideal. In other cases, we've had people each do this individually on their own and then comparing the different scores. And of course, that's easier if you have the PowerPoint deck and everything you can assemble. And you can also get Excel-based output. Or what we've done is seen everyone get in a room or on a WebEx call and have someone projecting and then do it together. In other words, kind of do it jointly. And that's been effective as well. These are some great conversations. When in our CMS lifecycle should we do this assessment? Well, Jay, that's a great question. I would say anytime. You can do it now. Even if you're thinking about switching a tool, get it now, get it as a baseline, and then see where you're at 3 months and 6 months from now. Let's see, the other question, can I do this for non-WCM technologies, e.g. ECM? And absolutely, yes. There's capability models for all the different lines on the subway map. There's some similarities to them, but they also uniquely measure your effectiveness relative to that particular technology. So here's an interesting one. Will this help me pick the right CMS? Or will it tell me which ones are better? And the short answer to that is no. It's not designed to be a shortlist generator. We do have a shortlist generator tool separately, and you can see a recorded webinar about that on our website. So if you're trying to create a shortlist, we have a very different tool that asks you a very different set of questions. Now, what this will, though, influence potentially your selection by helping you understand sort of where your current effectiveness is and where some of your current capacity is. And we often encourage people to do this at the beginning of the selection project because it helps you understand really just how sophisticated a platform can you really handle and where do you need to go institutionally and organizationally and from a human resources standpoint to be able to be effective with any modern CMS tool. And maybe you should take a hard look at where you're at and ask yourself, do I really need this high-end Mercedes, or would I do much better with a Hyundai or a nice Honda? And that's a really important question to ask yourself in the CMS world these days, because the Hyundais and the Hondas are a lot better, a lot faster. So really kind of understanding what you are able to handle from an effectiveness standpoint is really important as you go in. But again, in terms of actually building a short list, that is obviously going to be another thing altogether. So, all right. Well, I'm afraid we're bumping up against the end of the hour. This is always fun, and certainly enjoyed our time together. Feel free to ping us if you have any further questions. You can look forward to a message shortly about how to download the deck, and if you're a subscriber, get access to the full recording. Please check in with us 1 week from now, where we will have another webinar, our next webinar, which is going to be on flavors of the cloud.